everybody. Good morning. We're on page 209 in the Kuzari. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has really, this is sort of like the ethical portion of the Kuzari, where we sort of get an introduction to the ethics of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Every philosophy work invariably contains a section where the author presents the ethics of his philosophy, the moral ethics of his philosophy. And this is where Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has starting to present his. So the first part of his moral ethics, as far as how a human being is supposed to behave morally and ethically, he presented to us last week that although there is an absolute precision to mitzvot, and that there is no way that a human being can possibly intuit for himself or herself how they're supposed to structure their lives as far as serving Hashem, but there is a basic ethical prerequisite to the performance of those mitzvot that put a person spiritually in a spiritually close position to the Ribono Shel Olam. And that ethical prerequisite is what the prophets say, like the prophet Micha says, Ma Hashem doresh mimecha, ki imasos mishpat ve'avas chesed ve'hatznei alechet im Elokecha. What does God want from you? Except to love justice and perform justice and love kindness and walk humbly with the Lord. Right? Those are the things that Hashem says are the prerequisite to having a close relationship with Him. Ultimate closeness cannot be achieved on a spiritual level unless a person goes through certain bodily motions, which we call the mitzvot. But if you're not prepared to behave like a mensch, like Derech Eretz Kadmon LaTorah, there is no way that the mitzvot will reach you, will be the vehicle to bring you to that very close level to Hashem. Okay, so that's the first sort of introduction that we have to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's ethics. We're going to continue on paragraph 49. The rabbi had sort of asked a rhetorical question. The rhetorical question was, is it possible that a Jew can uphold justice and love truth alone while abandoning Bris Milah, Shabbos, the laws of Pesach, and so forth, and still be spiritually successful? Do you really think that that's what the prophet Micha means? So in paragraph 49, the Kuzari says, of course not, no, as you have indicated. But the philosophers believe that one can be saintly without giving preference to any one religion, be it Judaism, Christianity, another religion, or even a new religious practice that one has invented. But with this outlook, we are relying on extrapolations, on logic, and on philosophizing. Every person could establish his own religion based on what his extrapolations conclude. This would be worthless. This would be worthless. Now, how does the Kuzari know that this would be worthless? How does he know that it would be worthless to rely on your own extrapolations, on your own logic, to come up with your own religion? What's wrong with a religion that you make up, that you come up with your own innovations in serving Hashem? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I saw the most amazing second half of a video last night. My landsman, Shlomo Yehuda Rechnitz, many of you may have heard of him. He's a big philanthropist in the yeshiva world. And he just spoke at a dinner in Lakewood on Sunday night. If you have a chance to watch that video, did you watch it?
My daughter just told me about it.
Oh, yeah? It's really amazing. He says that we've invented a new religion in the very religious world. The new religion is who can out-frum, or who can be frummer than the next. And I don't know what the repercussions of that speech are going to be, because perhaps he got himself into a little hot water. I mean, you have all the Rosh Yeshivas sitting on the dais, and I'm wondering what was going through their mind. But he was basically saying, having to do with children's education, he says, how can a day school principal capitulate to a phone call where a parent calls up and says, don't let that other child in the school, in my child's class, if you do, I'm pulling my child out. He says this is what apparently goes on quite a bit in a number of schools. It's not just in Lakewood. I'm sure it happens in other places as well, that sometimes people feel that my child is holy and pure and cannot be tainted. And so therefore people have distorted, we talked about distortions in religion many times. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was really, that was one of his tirades. He said that when people sort of overemphasize one aspect of Judaism at the expense of another, you end up with a completely different religion. So it's really sort of like the same idea. Is the whole premise of Sefer Kuzari is that you cannot extrapolate based on your own logic. Now, how does he know this? And let's go back. I want you to dig deep into your memory banks to the very beginning of Sefer Kuzari. How does Rabbi Yehuda Halevi know that you cannot extrapolate and you cannot use logic to come up with a proper mode of religious service? What was the whole story of the Kuzari based on? Come on, anyone remember? How did the book get started? What was the whole beginning of the book? It was about a dream. And what was the dream? What was the, I have a dream, right, Martin Luther King? But what was the dream? What was the dream of the Khazar king? Anyone remember what his dream was? Right, so if you take a look back at the very, very beginning, the famous line that the angel comes to the Khazar king, and he says, "Kavanascha ritzuya etzel haborei, aval ma'asecha einam ritzuyim." Your intentions are very desirable to the Creator, but your actions are not desirable to the Creator. Do you remember that recurring dream? It's on page 47. It's the very first page of the text. If you want to go back and refresh your memories. That was the whole premise of this book. The whole premise of the entire Sefer Kuzari is the dream. Your intentions are desirable to the Creator, but not your deeds. So, what does that indicate? For Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, Judaism or the Torah is not something that a person can intuit and derive through logic. There's a certain type of prescribed mode of living that only Hashem can give to us because we simply don't understand the deeper machinations of reality. And because we don't have a complete grasp, there's no way that we can ever know that shaking a lulav and esrog on those 8 days of Sukkot has this metaphysical, unbelievable effect on the cosmos and upon our neshamas. There's no way that we can appreciate that. And therefore, no matter how well-intentioned the human being is, they can never reach ultimate closeness to Hashem through logic alone. The mind has limitations. Yes?
And by the same token, things that might feel good to us, that might make us feel like we're being spiritual, if not prescribed by the Torah, might be totally off and worthless.
That's true. If it's not prescribed by the Torah, things that you intuit, right, that feel good to you.
Right.
And that's why we have to be very, very careful. We're always on that razor's edge. We don't want to let our Judaism go stale. There's always got to be that balance that we are able to maintain between innovation and tradition. We have to maintain fealty and complete loyalty to the halachic paradigm, to the system of halacha that was passed down to us from generation to generation. But within that paradigm, we have to figure out ways that we can keep the Torah fresh and alive, and figure out ways for ourselves, for the individual or for our community, to be able to keep things exciting and new and alive. But you're right. Just because it feels good doesn't automatically mean that it's right. If it's within the halachic paradigm and it feels good, so then you should try to do it. No, it's because that'll help you. It'll help you get more into it. So, for example, there's 2 ways to daven. You can daven just by saying the words, or you can daven and really feel more. You can daven and sing. You can daven and clap. And whatever makes you feel more connected, you have to try and innovate. So there's nothing wrong with making it feel good, right? You're supposed to make it feel good. You're supposed to feel excited about it. But you have to make sure that you never depart from the halachic system. Yes?
So what about halachic things that you're supposed to do that make you feel bad?
Well, from Rabbi Yehuda Levi's standpoint, there are a lot of medicines that we take that taste quite bitter. A lot of bitter pills out there. And sometimes you just have to swallow them to take away some of the bitterness, and sometimes you got to take it with a spoonful of sugar, right? Like Mary Poppins would say. So you have to, I guess depending upon your
Not personally
example.
bad, let's say not in the sense of discomfort, but in the sense of maybe you just feel inherently that they might be wrong. I won't go so far as to say morally wrong, but wrong.
Right.
Like, there are a lot of things. Like, should I give you an example?
All right, Linda, put it on the table.
So, for example, like a naguna, all the, or things that are decided from time
yes.
past.
Let me give you another example. Mamzer.
Right.
The classic example that is put forth by Jews who wish to go beyond the bonds or the boundaries of halacha. They say, look how unfair and immoral the Torah is. It says that a child who comes into this world through no fault of his or her own and is a halachic mamzer, halachic bastard, can never marry within the Jewish community. Look how unfair, and it seems wrong, right? That seems to be. Well, of course, for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, just as we cannot intuit halacha because sometimes our minds are not as finely attuned to the realities of the universe, there are times even when we feel that something appears wrong to us, and yet, from Hashem's vantage point, it's entirely correct. Now, those cases we can find ways to explain them. But I will say this, the Torah system, as it was presented to the Jewish people, was presented to a holy people. A holy people do not keep their wives chained, right? The fact that sometimes, from a societal perspective, certain laws don't work or don't seem to work or don't seem to be fair is more of a reflection on the depraved state of the holy nation than it is on the depraved state of the halachic system. So we have to bear that in mind whenever we try to scrutinize any particular mitzvah, especially when it has societal repercussions. Okay, so that would be worthless, he says, to try and invent our own religion or extrapolate what correct religious practice is. So that leads us now to page 210, to what the Rabbi said. So the Rabbi says now, that being the case, asceticism is of no value, for the Torah has not charged us with this type of service. The Torah has not told us, thou shalt be ascetic. And the whole conversation started when we started this section a couple of weeks ago. We talked about the Kuzari's objection. He says, why is it that I see some members of other religions, like monks and friars and all those other guys, why are they so devoted, seemingly on a higher level than Jews are, in the way that they live their lives with such asceticism, with such a sense of deprivation, of physical comfort? And that seems to me to be a holier way of living, because you're divesting yourself of the physical world that seems to pull you away from spiritual service. And so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had started off by telling him, he says, you can't just base yourself on what seems to be correct from a logical perspective. That's a mistake. But he says, let's talk about asceticism, though. He says, the Torah has not charged us with this type of service, and therefore you cannot assume that Hashem wants it if the Torah doesn't tell us to do this. Rather, we are bidden to take the moderate path, to equitably provide for every faculty within our body and soul its due portion, provided we avoid excess. So the first thing is that we acknowledge in Judaism that we are composite beings. We are comprised of body and soul. Hashem wants us to take care of both our body and soul and to nourish the two, and to arrive at some kind of balance between the body and the soul so that both of them are healthy. And this, of course, is the moderate path, this derech hamimutza. What does what does he call it in Hebrew? The derech hashaveh is what he calls it. The Rambam calls it midah beinonit. Everyone has a slightly different description for the moderate path. I copied for you what the Rambam says in Hilchos Deos about the moderate path, but I wanted you first to understand that this idea of the moderate path, or what Aristotle calls the golden mean, and a number of other Greek philosophers call the golden mean, is not something that is unique to Judaism. It is a concept that is universal. It's universal to, starting with the ancient Greek philosophers. It is universal in Chinese philosophy. It's universal in Christian and Islamic philosophy, and in Jewish philosophy as well. So you just have some, he says, just quoting from Wikipedia, in philosophy, especially that of Aristotle, the golden mean is the desirable middle between two extremes, one of excess and the other of deficiency. For example, in the Aristotelian view, courage is a virtue, but if taken to excess would manifest as recklessness, and in deficiency, cowardice. In Chinese philosophy, a similar concept, doctrine of the mean, was propounded by Confucius. Buddhist philosophy likewise includes the concept of the middle way. And there's a famous story from the philosophers of Crete, which talks about the famous Icarus. Icarus was the young boy whose father gave him a pair of magic feathered wings. And he told his son, you can fly with those wings, but be careful. Don't go too low and fly, because you may end up crashing in the water. But don't fly too high, because you'll be affected by the sun's heat. So Icarus did not heed his father. He flew up and up until the sun melted the wax off his wings. For not heeding the middle course, he fell into the sea and drowned. That's the mythological story of the middle path. And in the Eudemian Ethics, I'm just skipping just to read a few different passages. Aristotle writes on the virtues. Aristotle's theory on virtue ethics is one that does not see a person's actions as a reflection of their ethics, but rather looks into the character of a person as the reason behind their ethics. His constant phrase is the middle state between. His psychology of the soul and its virtues is based on the golden mean between the extremes. In the Nicomachean Ethics, trying to follow the method of starting with approximate things gentlemen can agree on and looking at all circumstances, Aristotle says that we can describe virtues as things that are destroyed by deficiency or excess. Someone who runs away becomes a coward, while someone who fears nothing is rash. In this way, the virtue bravery can be seen as depending upon a mean between two extremes. People become habituated well by first performing actions that are virtuous, possibly because of the guidance of teachers or experience, and in turn these habitual actions then become real virtue, where we choose good actions deliberately. The Rabbi in Hilchos Deos talks about this derech yeshara, and in the first chapter of Hilchos Deos, halacha daled, you can see that I've copied it for you. He says, "Haderech hayeshara hi midah beinonit shebechol de'ah v'de'ah michol hadeyot sheyesh lo la'adam." Now, when Rambam talks about a de'ah, he's talking about an attitude, a mental trait. But it applies to lifestyle as well, which is really what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is saying, and to which the Rambam also agrees. But it's the middle path in every type of character trait that a person possesses. Now, of course, the Rambam says that there are exceptions to this rule. There are certain situations where having a median path is not virtuous. So, for example, he says that when it comes to humility, a person is not supposed to be equally situated between arrogance and humility. You're supposed to be exceedingly humble. But when it comes to most character traits, the middle path is supposed to be the golden mean. It is the path that is equidistant between both extremes, and is not leaning towards one direction or the other. And that's why he says, he goes into Chazal and he says, Lefichach tzivu chachamim harishonim sheyehi adam sam deotav tamid, or sham deotav tamid, u'misha'er otam. A person should evaluate his character constantly, really like sort of self-analysis, and measure everything that he does and that he thinks. And he should try to make sure that he's always in the middle. So, what's some examples? Lo yehi ba'al chema noach lichos. You should not be a person who's easy to anger, like have an anger management problem. V'lo kemet she'eno margish. But don't be like a dead person either. Like you have to have some emotional response, but rather ela beinoni. But be somewhere in the middle. Lo yichos ela al davar gadol shira'ui lichos alav. Only become upset for things that are really major issues. For the minor issues, you got to let it go. Kedei shelo ya'aseh kayotze bo pam acheret. And the reason is because you should not habituate yourself to becoming upset or excited. V'chein lo yitaveh ela lidvarim shaguf tzarich lahem v'i efshar liot bezulatan. And similarly, when it comes to physical indulgence, only allow yourself to desire those things that are necessary for your body to sustain itself. In other words, that piece of cheesecake that's on the buffet table, that's not something that you should be running chalashing towards, but the carrot sticks are the things that you should really be running to. Oh my goodness. If only we could fulfill such an easy directive, right? V'chein lo yeh amel be'isko ela lahasig davar shetzarich lo l'chayei sha'ah. And similarly, when you work, don't try to amass great fortunes. Work for what you need. Work for what you need in order to get by. Your objective should not be to become excessively wealthy. And anyway, so you see, when he talks about hazranut, he talks about kamsanut, he talks about being stingy versus being wasteful in the way that you spend money. Always try to find the golden mean in between those two. And if you look at the second chapter, we're just going to jump to the second chapter, the Rambam does talk about sometimes people become misaligned. People sometimes get ill. And when you become ill and you need to seek out a cure, you go to a doctor. When you become psychologically ill, you go to a psychologist or psychiatrist. When you become spiritually ill, because you've become misaligned in the ethics, the way that in your character development, so you have to go to a chacham, you have to go to a wise man, a Torah sage, who will try and guide you and try to help you align your behavior to put you back on track, to help you, guide you to say, okay, these are certain things, these are certain prescriptions that I can offer for you to help you get back on track to where you ought to be on a spiritual path that is the golden mean. And therefore, if you take a look in Halacha Beis, after he describes the need to go to a chacham, he says, the ketzad hi refuatam. How do you cure if someone from their misalignment from the golden mean? Mishu ba'al chema, if someone is given to excessive anger, omrim lo lahanhig atzmo she'im hu kavikulal lo yargish klal. We tell a person anger management course, right? So if you're given to anger, so what you should do is, okay, the next time someone hits you, the next time someone curses you or insults you, say nothing. Become like that stone that the Rambam was critical of before. V'yelech b'derech zu zman meruba ad she'yitaker hachema melibo. And that's how you should comport yourself for an extended period of time until you're able to remove anger from within you. V'im haya gevalev yanhig atzmo b'bizayon har. If, let's say, you're excessively arrogant, you should allow yourself to be degraded, okay, in an excessive way. So, for example, v'yeshev lemata min hakol v'yilbash bluyei schavot hamevazot et lobshehen, that you should sit lower than everybody else, you should wear shmatas, you should let yourself dress in rags, clothes with holes in them, and meaning things that will immediately make you feel that you're lowly and servile. Until that arrogance is removed from your heart. And that way you'll be able to eventually land back in the middle. And then once you get back to that golden mean, do your best to maintain that for the rest of your life. And this is the prescription for all misalignments. If you find yourself misaligned to one extreme, pull yourself over to the opposite extreme on a temporary basis, right? V'yinhog bo zman rav ad shiachzor l'derech hatova v'hi midah benonit shebechol de'ah v'de'ah, until you eventually land back in the middle, and this is true for every character trait. So Rabbi Yehuda Levi basically says is that when you look carefully enough into the Torah and into the words of our sages, you will find that every mitzvah is prescribed in this way, that Hashem wants us to live according to this golden mean. We are bidden to take the moderate path, to equitably provide for every faculty within our body and soul its due portion, provided we avoid excess. For being excessive with one faculty results in curtailing another. For example, one who overindulges his physical desires will compromise his mental faculties and vice versa. And one who is overly ambitious will lose in other traits. And therefore, you should not exercise any extreme. In this sense, the Rambam and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi are very much in sync. They're both very much in sync with the universal principle of the golden mean. And therefore, he says, fasting is not an appropriate form of service for one whose physical desires and faculties are already weak and whose body is lean. Such a person would be better off taking care of his body. Nor is living in deprivation an appropriate type of service for one who is able to acquire luxury without too much effort and whose wisdom and good deeds will not be compromised by his wealth. And certainly if a person has a family to support and his desire to make a living is therefore l'shem shamayim, for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of heaven, then for him monetary pursuit is healthy. So it's a very normal, very wholesome, very healthy attitude towards olam hazeh, towards gashmiut, towards the physical world. If you can handle it, then become a part of it. If you find yourself, like we talked about with the Nazir, when we first started this whole discussion of fasting, Hashem makes accommodations for people who indulge in excess. The example of that is the Nazir. The Nazir is a person who has to temporarily go on a diet, a spiritual diet. Physical diet wouldn't be bad either. Sometimes we all need to diet in different ways. Some people need to diet by restricting their food intake. Some people need to diet by restricting other forms of practice or indulgence. There are so many different kinds of diets that we go on. And that's why we said the diet itself is characterized by Chazal as being an Aveira. But not an Aveira because it's wrong to diet, but because you let yourself go to that point where you need to diet. Right? So if you had always been conducting yourself according to the golden mean, so then dieting would never be necessary. The fact that we need to go on a diet is an indication that we haven't maintained that golden standard of being in the middle path. And there's a prescription for that, as the Rambam says, so go to the other extreme. Try to make sure that you avoid those things which allowed you to go to the opposite extreme. So here we see once again a continuation of the Kuzari's ethics. Part one of the ethics of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was the idea that derech eretz kadma l'Torah, that menschlichkeit, behaving with courtesy and kindness towards your fellow man, is a prerequisite for coming close to Hashem. And the second part of his ethics is that asceticism is only necessary for those who can't handle the physical world in a healthy fashion. There is a role for asceticism. It's for people who have overindulged. But for those who are already have a healthy relationship with the physical world, that kind of abstention, that kind of asceticism, of deprivation, is unhealthy and will eventually cause you to not be able to serve Hashem in some other area where He wants you to serve Him properly. So for example, if a person is lean, a person is trim, a person is healthy, and Shabbos calls for indulgence in rich foods, Yontif calls for that kind of indulgence, so one who refuses to indulge even on those festive occasions is actually not serving Hashem in the optimal way. Hashem wants a person to be able to utilize this world in a healthy fashion. Okay? Ad kan. Let's go to a parsha.